Hey, have you ever seen that old movie, The Sixth Sense? That was a very well done movie, um, talking about this little boy's ability to see dead people. Very interesting show, big twist at the end. I won't give it away if you haven't seen it, but a classic. I know my one son probably would like it because he doesn't like intense movies like that, and it's pretty intense, but that got to me to thinking about, our ability or our different senses. We know our five senses, but are there other things that we should be focusing on that are important also? That sometimes we should develop, but it's not even really, should we develop some things? It's more of it's already in front of you. You just don't, it's all around you. You're ignoring it. You don't learn to focus on it or recognize some of these things. And a lot of times, we have to step outside ourselves to see what's there, to see other people's pain and how you can help. So it's not necessarily something that you need to be born with, but an ability you need to be able to learn to focus on what's already there. And so, you know, we had we've been in southern Utah for about 5 years, and that transition from Salt Lake to down here was difficult, not only for me but for the rest of my family. I had two sons at the time that came with us, and one of the older sons was in high school, and so he had friends and a job, and he was part of a water polo team. He had connections that all were severed when he moved down here, and it caused him a lot of grief, a lot of pain. And he was uncomfortable. He was going to a brand new school. Um, some of you might know how that feels, and it's not easy. It would be very difficult. And yet he had the ability to step outside of himself and look around at what other people were experiencing and imagine the pain that other people were feeling in our family. It's almost like he had the ability, he had a sixth sense, a third eye, an ability, or he was able to focus on not only himself, but other people. And there were other people in the family that were in greater pain and sacrificing more for him for what he was able to enjoy in his life than maybe even what he was. And most people don't see what's going on around them, and they kind of purposely try not to. They're oblivious to what's going on or what God wants them to do. And I thought, why is that? Why don't they want to notice those things? Or maybe it's because they see better examples of what they should be doing. They don't want to change. They don't want to become better. It's hard to change. It's not easy. And when Jesus was on this earth, he talked about a majority of people and then the few. In Matthew 13:15, he's talking to his disciples and a crowd, and he says, these people have become closed-minded and hard of hearing. They've shut their eyes so that their eyes never see, their ears never hear, their minds never understand, and they never return to me for healing. So have you ever not heard what your parents have asked you to do? You probably heard, but you pretend you didn't hear them. Sometimes maybe I even do that with my wife. She asked me to do something, but most of the case that's not the case. But so what is the Lord here saying? Open your mind, open your eyes, open your ears, and do what he's telling you to do and showing you to do, and you will be healed. The pain that you have, if you do those things and follow his advice, his voice and his advice, which is your conscience, he will tell you what to do. He will tell you what the next step is. He will tell you what's out of place, what you need to fix. And then the Lord continues in the next verse, Matthew 13:16. He says, "But blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear." So talking to his disciples, they were able to develop and focus on this sense of following his voice. I was also thinking another scripture. It talks about the relationship you have with your parents. In Deuteronomy 5:16, it says, "Honor your father and your mother as the Lord your God has commanded you, so that you may live long and that it may go well with you in the land the Lord your God is giving you." There's also another version, an Amplified Bible version that I liked. It says honor, and then in parentheses, respect, obey, care for your father and your mother as Lord your God has commanded you, so that your days on earth may be prolonged, and so that it may go well with you in the land which Lord your God gives you. So this word that's used there, respect, in the 1828 dictionary, I looked up respect, and it says to view or consider with some degree of reverence, to esteem as possessed of real worth. So how do you honor your parents and respect them? You have to value or give reverence or esteem something that's of great value. So something can be right in front of you of great value, but you don't notice it. How do you come to value someone with real worth unless you recognize and appreciate the things they do for you? So I would add to that scripture, appreciate the sacrifices your parents make for you every day in order that you may value what they do and esteem what they do for you every day. So I was saying, both of my sons have a difficult time moving down here, starting new schools. Of the two sons, I had one that actually stepped outside of himself and the pain that he was having to recognize some of the sacrifices his parents were making, and me in this case. One day in a birthday card, or maybe it was a Father's Day card, he wrote something that meant a lot to me. And it was a very simple phrase. And he said, "Thank you so much for commuting back and forth from Salt Lake every week." That meant a lot to me. I was in the middle of commuting back and forth from Salt Lake till I found a job down here, and it was about a year, 52 weeks driving back and forth. And it was, some people do that for a living. They commute and it's not a big deal. But for me, it was a huge deal and a huge sacrifice. And he could see how difficult it was. So every Friday night after I was done with work, I would load everything up and drive 4 hours to my home. And then on Sunday evenings, I would pack everything up and head back to Salt Lake. And we had this tradition. After I packed all my things, I'd get in the car and start driving our way down the street, and my family would wave to me until I drove out of sight. And I remember watching them in my rear view mirror, waving out the window, how difficult that was for me, how painful to be separated for that time, and to face a new week kind of alone. So for him to recognize that and recognize the sacrifice that I was making, and appreciate that, was knowing that he valued that was important to me. And yet, I don't think he would fully recognize the sacrifice that I was making unless he went through it himself. Um, Another time, I was staying for a few months with a friend in Salt Lake, living in their basement. And my family had come up to Salt Lake and I was packing all of my stuff up and moving to my parents' house where I would stay for another 9 months or so. And when I was moving things into the car, the same son went over to my friend that had let me stay there, and he told him, "Hey, thank you for letting my dad stay in your home." He was probably 15 or 16 at the time. So his ability to not only see the sacrifice my friend was making, but the kindness that he was willing to extend towards me, he let him know that he appreciated letting me stay at his house. So why don't more people notice these things? It's all around us. The sacrifice that your parents are making. Um, Maybe it's because they recognize that better example and they don't want to improve. They don't want to change. But uh, I mean, how would you feel if someone gave you a gift and you showed them that you appreciated that gift? That person giving the gift to you would feel that it was of value, that you appreciated it, and they would uh, think that their sacrifice was well worth it. What would happen if you worked your butt off for a few months and you spent money on giving someone a gift and they didn't appreciate it? It would be very hard to continue giving those gifts to that person without that appreciation. I had another son that's living with us right now that I was very impressed with this last Christmas. He had spent mo- all of last summer working very hard at two different jobs, a construction job and a job at Little Caesars, and saving his money. He very rarely spent any money. He's been saving for a car. And I was very impressed with him because it came up to Christmas time and he wanted to give me a gift. And he asked me what I wanted, and I told him I needed a new pair of dress shoes and told him, they're very expensive. Your mom can help pay some of it. I don't expect you to pay all of it. But he went out and found a very nice pair of shoes. And I know they were expensive because I've looked at them. They're probably at least 150 bucks. And he was so excited to give me those shoes. And I think about what he had to sacrifice to buy me those shoes. I mean, 10 bucks an hour, you know, I'd be working 15 hours to buy those shoes. And so I was impressed and I was thankful. And every time I put the shoes on, I show him and I show that gratitude. But he will never be able to repay me for the years and years of sacrifices that I've made for him and for his brothers and for my wife. It's nice to have him give back, but it's also better for him to recognize and value and appreciate what I do for him every day. So as a parent, how do you feel when you have a son or daughter that recognizes the sacrifice you make for them every day? I appreciated my one son that pointed it out and wrote it in a card. It makes it easier to make those sacrifices for him. I would still do it, but appreciation goes a long ways. So appreciate the things that your parents are doing for you. They spend hours and hours of their time working to bring you things that you need, a place to live, food, clothing, and a lot of other things that you have that you wouldn't have if they weren't willing to sacrifice for you. So why does God want us to thank him in all that he gives us? If we give thanks, we are stepping outside of ourselves, even if we are in pain, and saying, hey, wait a minute here. There's more going on here. I can see someone else someone above myself that has sacrificed and paid a greater price for me for what I have. There's someone greater, there's someone higher, paying a greater price for everything I have. And that's true in life. That's true in business. There's people that pay great prices for what they have. You know, even if we look at something like an example of penicillin, I don't know if you know the story of that. Just like to take a minute and talk about it. But back in the 1820s, before penicillin was invented or discovered, people would die from simple bacterial infections all the time. If I cut myself and it was infected, I would get a bacterial infection. It could spread. They didn't have a way to treat that, and I would die. And millions of people died. In 1928, Dr. Alexander Fleming returned from a vacation to find mold growing on a petri dish that had some bacteria on it, and he noticed the mold seemed to prevent the bacteria from growing. As soon as he identified the mold, he identified the mold would produce a self-defense chemical that could kill the bacteria. He named the substance penicillin. That's kind of why we joke about cheese having mold on it, and it's a form of penicillin. And it is, that mold produces a chemical that will kill bacteria. So he discovered this, and he published his findings and presented his discovery to a medical research club. And to his surprise, most people ignored him. His peers showed little interest in his work, but he was undeterred at that point, and he enlisted the help of some chemists and some other experts to help purify this penicillin from the mold. And none of them were successful. And there was one professor in particular that said he was an expert, and he was a biochemist, an expert in fungal substances. And he declared to him the production of penicillin for therapeutic purposes is almost impossible. Can't be done. To synthesize this chemical that mold uses to defend itself, it can't be replicated, it can't be done. And so what did Fleming do? He gave up. So it can't be done. So he gave up. Unfortunately, he gave up. And I'm sure that he would have changed his course and not given up if he could have seen the millions of people that would have benefited and been saved by his continued work. So it was almost 10 years that it sat on the shelf and nothing happened. It wasn't until 1937 that a new team of scientists picked up his work again and started. And then it was through a number of people. And this team, it was another 6 years before they figured out how to isolate this chemical and mass produce it so that they had sufficient supplies to help soldiers, basically, in 1943 in World War II to save millions of lives from the injuries that they suffered. So the question is, would you work 10 to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, maybe 7 days a week, for 15 years to find a cure for a disease if you knew it would benefit millions of people? And I think some of us would, and some of us do. Some of us aren't willing to put that sacrifice in. But there's a huge benefit to many people, people greater, people higher, that are willing to sacrifice years and years and years of dedicating themselves to a cause greater to themselves. And that's a big step. Right now, we take steps and steps. Right now, we need to focus on what should I do to help my parents? Well, let's look at cleaning up my room, taking the garbage out, doing well in school. But back to developing that sixth sense, that third eye. You need to recognize the sacrifice that others have made for your benefit. to hear the Lord's voice and to open your mind to new ideas and better ways of doing things. And I think there's a lot of different abilities to see things, different talents, different types of seeing different things. What we've been talking about is being able to see other people's suffering and sacrifices for you to make your life better. That's one aspect of this. But there's also ability to see people's gifts and how they can be used best for them and for other purposes and for God's purposes. There's the ability to see how to coach someone and help someone improve their lives. There's a lot of people that make a lot of money coaching people, being a life coach, being a professional coach. There's also another ability to see people's pain and suffering that they experience, sometimes because of their own choices and what they put themselves in, and the ability to see how to help. So there's a very interesting article. I'll post the link to this article in the description field. This lady talks about being able to see other people's suffering. And she found this Pastor Rick Warren's son. He talked about him. Unfortunately, he had committed suicide. And he talked about his son's, one of his abilities. And it was very touching what he wrote about. He said, his son Matthew had a brilliant intellect and a gift for sensing who was most in pain or most uncomfortable in a room. He'd make a beeline to that person to engage and encourage them. So I think that's an amazing gift, but a gift that we can all develop. It's a sense, a sixth sense, that instead of ignoring the needs around you, you can focus on it and develop that gift and be a great benefit to people around you. Because when we are our best selves, we can help others to be the best they can. So we are our best selves when we help others be their best selves. You know, there's only a few steps that you really need to do. We talked about the first step, kind of get outside of yourself. Don't be so wrapped up in your own world that you don't see anyone else or anything. You know, people watching, you can be watching for people that need help. And it's not hard. If you go to lunch or if you're going through an office or if you're in an office party, you see that one person is sitting alone, so withdrawn, excluded. People are reaching out for your help. Go to the one. Go to the one that's excluded. Go and sit with the one that doesn't look too happy. Instead of avoiding and being with the cool crowd, go to the one. So basically, helping people that are in need is a great opportunity for us. So Matthew's gift, what he did, he saw those needs and then he took action. He went and did something. He tried to help. That's a huge, if you notice it, there's a next step of going out and trying to help. So the more you do something, the easier it gets, the more natural it becomes, the more automatic it becomes, and the more that God gives you to help other people. And never underestimate the power even of the smallest gesture to make a positive difference in someone's life. And I've talked about one of those gestures that a guy did for me when we were on a bike ride. So we all have five very specific senses, and we use them, but don't forget about the most important one, that sixth sense, to help people and to recognize sacrifices. What gifts has God given you, and how can you use them for God's purposes? The best and most fulfilling work that we can do is to help other people. Start now at your age. Open your eyes, open your ears, and your mind to God's direction. Develop your skills and abilities to help other people.